My parents told me they wished I was never born. At my graduation dinner, what I said next silenced the entire restaurant. My name is Christian. I'm 29 years old, and this is the story of the moment that broke me and rebuilt me. It happened at a 5-star French restaurant, under chandeliers that sparkled like they were celebrating something magical. I had just graduated with honors in psychology from Northeastern University, summa cum laude no less, and my parents had surprised me with a reservation at one of the most exclusive places in Boston. It was the kind of restaurant they usually reserved for business deals and political fundraisers, not family. So when the waiter poured the champagne and my father raised his glass, I braced myself for the words I had waited 22 years to hear. We're proud of you. Instead, what came next shattered me completely. Sometimes we wish you were never born. That sentence? It sucked the air out of the room. I remember my fingers tightening around the base of the glass, the sound of silverware freezing mid-air, the waiter awkwardly backing away as if he just witnessed something unspoken. A moment too raw, too real. And the worst part, my mother didn't flinch. She nodded. You'd think I would have cried or stormed out in dramatic fashion, but no. I sat there, heart racing, mind numb, clarity blooming inside me like wildfire. And then I stood up. I looked them both in the eye and said something that changed the trajectory of my life, something I'll share in a moment. But before we get there, let me take you back to the beginning. Because that sentence didn't come out of nowhere. It was the final chapter in a long, painful story. A story of silent expectations, conditional love, and the endless quest for validation from people who saw me as a trophy they never quite won. I grew up in the quiet suburb of Brooklyn, just outside Boston, the kind of neighborhood where lawns were manicured and smiles were for show. My father, Harold Johnson, was a top-tier corporate attorney. My mother, Elizabeth, ran charity events like she was managing a political campaign. All for the optics, never the cause. From the outside, we were the perfect upper-middle-class family, but perfection came at a cost, mostly mine. Nothing I did was ever good enough. An A- in 3rd grade? The Robinson girl got straight A's. My dad would say, do better. When I made the swim team, it wasn't a celebration. It was, why aren't you the fastest? If I won 2nd place in the science fair, we only talked about who came in first. There was always someone better. Always something I hadn't done enough of. My life was measured in comparison and compliance. My father had a checklist: law, medicine, business. Only careers with prestige are worth pursuing. He'd remind me between bites of roast beef. My mother was more subtle, but no less brutal. Christian, you'd be so much prettier if you lost 10 pounds, she'd whisper as we passed the mirror in the hallway. And why aren't you friends with the Sullivan girl? Her father's on the hospital board. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a resume in progress. The only person who saw me was my grandmother, Evelyn. She used to say, you have a beautiful mind, Christian. Don't ever let anyone make you doubt that. She was the only person who asked about what I was feeling, not just what I was achieving. She was a retired counselor, and her tiny apartment was filled with psychology books that would quietly change the course of my life. When I told my father I wanted to study psychology, he looked at me like I'd declared I wanted to join the circus. Psychology is for people who couldn't handle real science, he scoffed. Besides, they don't make any money. Despite the resistance, I did it anyway with the help of Evelyn, who helped fund my tuition when my parents pulled their support. But when she passed away during my sophomore year, I was left with no one in my corner, no buffer, just me and their relentless disappointment. Still, I pushed through. I graduated with honors. I landed a job at a nationally recognized research institute. I was finally building the life I dreamed of. But on graduation day, the one day I thought they might finally see me, they destroyed me instead. And yet, that destruction became my freedom. Because what I said next at that dinner, in front of a restaurant full of strangers, didn't just silence them, it woke me up. This is the story of how one sentence from them broke everything, and how one sentence from me started everything. Growing up in Brooklyn, not the New York borough, but the polished suburb outside Boston, I lived in a world built for appearances. Our house looked like something out of a real estate magazine. A pristine colonial with white trim, navy shutters, and a lawn so perfectly trimmed it could have been a golf course. But behind that picture-perfect door lived a family of 3, or maybe 4, if you counted Image as a member of the household. My father, Harold Johnson, was the embodiment of success. Tailored suits, Harvard law degree, senior partner at a prestigious firm downtown. He walked with the kind of authority that silenced rooms and made waiters nervous. My mother, Elizabeth, was equally polished, all pearls and posture, a socialite who ran charity galas less out of empathy and more out of networking strategy. To outsiders, we were a dream family. Inside those walls, we were a pressure cooker. My earliest memory of disappointment was in 3rd grade. I brought home an A- on a math test. Proud, even excited, because it was a hard test. My father took one look inside. The Robinson girl got a perfect score. He said flatly, sliding the paper back like it was a failed report card. You're capable of more. I expect better next time. I nodded, trying to hide the sting. That moment set the tone for everything that followed. From that day forward, my value was measured against invisible standards. My worth was not in who I was, but in how closely I resembled what they wanted. In 5th grade, I placed 2nd in the regional science fair. Instead of praise, I got a postmortem. Where did you lose points? What did the winner do better? When I made the swim team, the celebration lasted 30 seconds before the critique started. You need to build more endurance. Try doubling your morning laps. There was never a well done, only what's next? My father had a vision for my life, and it only included 3 acceptable tracks: law, medicine, or finance. Careers with prestige, he would say over Sunday dinners, slicing his roast beef with mechanical precision. Everything else is a hobby. My mother had her own version of control. Where my father scrutinized grades and goals, she measured beauty, weight, and connections. Christian, you could be stunning if you just lost 10 pounds, she'd say while eyeing me in the mirror. Or, why don't you spend time with the Sullivan girl? Her father's on the hospital board. Even friendships were strategic. I wasn't a person to them. I was a billboard. Every word, every dress, every friendship was a reflection on their status. And God forbid I made them look bad. The only sanctuary I had was Evelyn, my paternal grandmother. She lived alone in a small apartment on the other side of town, far from the manicured lawns and cold dinners. She had warmth in her voice, twinkle in her eyes, and a library of psychology books that would change my world. You have a beautiful mind, Christian, she told me once when I shared thoughts about a book we'd read together. Never let anyone dim your light. In her home, I was seen not as a project, but as a person. When I turned 15, I confessed to Evelyn that I was fascinated by human behavior, emotions, and why people did the things they did. She beamed. She had been a counselor in her younger years, something my father never mentioned. You'd make a wonderful psychologist, she said. So when I finally told my parents I wanted to study psychology, the reaction was immediate and cutting. Psychology is for people who couldn't handle real science, my father scoffed. It's all theory and no substance. And they barely make any money, my mother added, sipping her tea without looking up. Despite their disdain, I applied to psychology programs, secretly. When the acceptance letters came, so did the storm. We're not paying for you to waste your potential, my father snapped. But Evelyn stepped in, quietly but fiercely. She offered to help with tuition. Your future is yours, Christian, not theirs. Thanks to her, I enrolled in Northeastern University and left home, physically. But emotionally, their voices followed me. Every holiday, every phone call, every comment was a reminder I was still a disappointment in their eyes. Evelyn passed away during my sophomore year, and with her went my last real support system in the family. After that, I was on my own, trying to succeed not just for me, but to finally prove them wrong. Little did I know they would never see it. And worse, they'd never want to. The email came 3 weeks before graduation, crisp, polite, and soaked in subtext. Your father and I would like to attend your graduation ceremony. We believe it is an important milestone and would like to be present. I stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to respond. This was the first time in 4 years that my parents had made a proactive gesture toward attending anything related to my college life. I called Jennifer, my roommate, immediately. They want to come to graduation. She paused. Like, willingly? Did they actually say that? Sort of. It reads more like a business RSVP than a parent's excitement, I admitted. But still, they're coming. There was a dangerous flicker of hope inside me. A whisper, maybe they're finally starting to come around. In the days that followed, I found myself preparing obsessively. I booked dinner reservations at a high-end French restaurant downtown, Lateau, a place they couldn't dismiss as. Beneath them, I had walked past it dozens of times and imagined one day eating there to celebrate something that mattered. I bought a navy blue dress, elegant, professional, and flattering. The kind of dress that says, I belong in any room, including yours. I even rehearsed how I'd tell them about the job I had landed, a research associate position at the Bowman Institute, one of the most respected centers in the country for adolescent psychology. They have to be impressed, I told Jennifer, fluffing the sleeves on the dress for the fourth time in front of the mirror. This isn't some barista gig. It's prestigious. It's real. Jennifer gave me a look, that perfect blend of skepticism and support she had mastered. Just remember, you don't have to convince them of anything to make it valid. I nodded, but inside I was still that girl who wanted her parents to clap from the stands. Graduation day came with sunshine and nerves. I arrived early, texting my parents instructions on where to sit. Their response was prompt, as always. Already here. Your father wanted optimal seating. Of course he did. I spotted them before the ceremony began. My father, stern in a perfectly tailored suit. My mother, pristine as always, pearl necklace and all. They looked exactly as they always had. Polished, untouchable, cold. You made it, I said, approaching them with a nervous smile. Traffic was lighter than expected, my father replied, checking his watch. The ceremony starts at 10, correct? I have a call at 2. No, you look beautiful. No, we're proud of you, just a schedule check. Still, I clung to the hope, maybe after the ceremony, maybe during dinner, maybe it just takes time. The ceremony passed in a blur. Handshakes, honor cords, the sound of my name being called with summa cum laude trailing behind it. I spotted them in the crowd. My father gave a half-hearted wave. My mother clapped, once or twice. Outside, we took the requisite family photos. My mother straightened my cap like I was 10 years old. Stand up straight, she instructed. Poor posture ruins photos. I smiled anyway. Maybe this is just how they love, stiff, awkward, quietly. Then my father suggested dinner. We made reservations for 6:30 at Lateau, he said. I blinked in surprise. You chose that place? Your mother wanted something elegant, he said with a shrug. Graduation is a formal occasion. The words formal occasion struck me. Not celebration, not joy. Just formality. Still, I accepted. Because it was something. The hours leading up to dinner felt like an audition. I changed, refreshed my makeup, practiced my lines in the mirror. I wanted this to be the night they saw me. Not as the disappointment who didn't follow the blueprint, but as the woman I had become. We arrived at the restaurant, greeted by name. My father, ever the VIP, had requested the best table. The maitre d' obliged. Champagne was poured. Toasts were made. My heart waited. Then I brought up the job. I'll be working with Dr. Whitman on a longitudinal study, I explained, excitement bubbling in my voice. It's a major project with national impact. Before I could finish, my mother interrupted. Are you sure you're ready for that level of responsibility? And just like that, the air changed. The smiles tightened. The conversation shifted. Criticism crept in like a slow leak. But I wasn't ready for the collapse that was coming. Not yet. That would arrive with dessert. The invitation wasn't to a celebration. It was to a cage match, dressed in fine linen and foie gras. They hadn't come to recognize my success. They had come to reclaim control. Castle was bathed in soft golden light, the kind that made everything and everyone look more important than they actually were. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Waiters glided, not walked. The napkins were folded into architectural origami. It was the kind of place that whispered, "Only the worthy dine here." We were shown to a private corner table near the windows, the best in the house, the maitre d' informed us, thanks to my father's connections. He soaked it in like a king returning to his throne. Champagne arrived without prompting. To graduation, my father said, lifting his glass. Not to me, not to your achievement, but to graduation. The event, not the person. I clinked politely, trying to ignore the ache already forming. Small talk drifted between bites of seared scallops and goat cheese salad. My mother complimented the presentation. My father commented on how the restaurant still held standards. For a while, I let myself float in the illusion. Maybe this was their version of affection. Cold, curated, but present. Then the knives came out, and not just for the filet mignon. So my father began, "What is next for you exactly? That research position?" "Yes," I smiled, "at the Bowman Institute in Seattle. I'll be working directly under Drive. Whitman." My mother cut in, "Oh, that woman with the short hair you mentioned? She seemed intense." "She's brilliant," I replied, choosing grace over irritation. "And what's the salary?" my father asked, slicing into his steak. I hesitated, then gave the figure. It was respectable for an entry-level research role. His eyebrows rose. "That's what our paralegals make," he said. "At least they have a path upward." "I do too," I countered. "This is a stepping stone to doctoral work, maybe even my own research team one day." My mother sipped her wine. "But you've always had such potential. It's hard not to feel you've limited yourself." I laughed, a nervous, instinctive reaction. Limited myself? I'm working in a nationally recognized research center. "But psychology?" she said with a delicate shudder. "Isn't that mostly talking about feelings?" I looked at them, both in their perfectly tailored outfits, with their perfectly rehearsed dismissiveness. "Yes," I said, "and feelings matter. Mental health matters." "That's a fad," my father declared. "People used to have grit, now they have therapists." The duck on my plate was exquisite, but it turned to ash in my mouth. "I've worked hard for this," I said quietly. "I've earned this." He leaned back in his chair. "And what will you do when you hit 30 and realize you've wasted your prime years on idealism?" my mother added, and gained weight doing it. That landed like a slap, not just because of what she said, but because of how casually she said it, as though this, too, was a helpful critique. The silence between us thickened. I looked around the elegant restaurant filled with quiet laughter and clinking glasses, and wondered if anyone else had ever had their soul dismantled over sea bass and foie. Raw. I tried one last time. I'm proud of what I've done. I think Grandma Evelyn would be too. My father's face hardened. "Don't bring her into this. She enabled your rebellion." I flinched. Evelyn, the one person who had ever made me feel worthy, reduced to an accomplice in failure. The waiter arrived with dessert menus. My mother didn't glance up. "I'll pass." Sugar shows on the face. And then, as if rehearsed, my father raised his glass again. "I would like to say something." I straightened slightly. Maybe, he would finally. "Today marks the completion of your education," he began, voice measured, deliberate. "And while it is not the path we would have chosen for you, your mother and I acknowledge your persistence." I waited, breath held. "But," he continued, "we cannot pretend to be proud of a direction that leads nowhere. When we see other families today celebrating children becoming doctors, attorneys, CEOs, sometimes," he paused, "we wish you had never been born." The words were spoken like a legal statement, cold, precise, final. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My fork slipped from my hand. All at once, the noise of the restaurant fell away, the people, the lights, the taste of the wine. Gone. What remained was that sentence, a death sentence, not of my body, but of every hope I had clung to for 22 years. Time stopped. I sat there, stunned, replaying the words in my mind. "We wish you had never been born." The sentence was delivered not in anger, not even in passion, but with a calm finality that made it even more devastating. A cold verdict passed by people who had always treated love as conditional. The air left my lungs. My father sipped his wine. My mother adjusted her napkin. Neither looked particularly moved by what had just been said. It was as if they had simply commented on the weather. The waiter, who had approached with dessert menus, paused, eyes wide, before silently backing away. Other diners looked on, some curious, some visibly uncomfortable. No one spoke. Except for the voice inside me, the one I hadn't heard in years. The voice that had once dreamed, once hoped. Enough. I slowly placed my napkin on the table, my hands surprisingly steady, my heart no longer racing, but calm, like the silence before a storm. I stood up. My mother's brows furrowed. "Christian, we haven't finished." I looked at them, really looked. For the first time, not as parents I desperately wanted to impress, but as people. Two deeply insecure, status-driven individuals whose vision of love had always been transactional. People who had mistaken control for care. "If that's what you wish," I said softly, "then consider it granted." They blinked. "From this moment forward," I continued, my voice rising just enough to be heard by more than just our table, "live your lives as though I was never born. You don't have to be disappointed in me anymore. You don't have to explain me. You don't have to love me, because clearly you never did." Gasps from surrounding tables. A spoon clattered to the floor somewhere behind me. My father's face reddened. "Christian." "No," I said firmly. "Not this time." "You don't get to silence me. For 22 years, I twisted myself into someone you could tolerate. I studied harder, smiled wider, tried thinner, always chasing an approval that was never coming." I turned to my mother. "And you, every comment, every sideways glance, every time you treated me like a reflection of your own insecurity, I let it sink in. I let it shape me." Then back to my father. "And you turned your intelligence into a weapon. You mocked my choices, belittled my passions, and finally decided my existence was a mistake." I took a breath. "Well, here's the mistake. I spent 22 years thinking you were the ones who defined my worth." Silence. "I'm done," I said, "done begging, done explaining, done shrinking." And then, softer but stronger, "I may not be the daughter you wanted, but I am the woman I needed to become, and she deserves better." With that, I picked up my clutch, nodded once, and turned. The room, still frozen. The maître d' moved slightly toward me, as if to intervene, then stopped. The valet outside took my ticket without a word. I slid into my car, shut the door, and then, finally, the tears came. Years of repression, self-doubt, and silent screaming cracked open in a single moment. But they weren't the hopeless tears of a broken child. These were tears of release, of rebirth. From that point on, everything changed. I drove away from that restaurant not just in distance, but in identity. That dinner wasn't a tragedy. It was a threshold. The moment I stopped trying to earn love. The moment I realized my freedom didn't require their permission. The moment humiliation turned into power. The drive back to Jennifer's apartment felt endless. The silence in the car wasn't peaceful. It was charged. A strange combination of emptiness and clarity sat in my chest like a stone. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, my words, their expressions, the stunned hush of the restaurant. I had finally spoken my truth, unfiltered, undeniable. But now what? When Jennifer opened the door, I collapsed into her arms. "They said they wish I'd never been born," I whispered. Her arms tightened around me without hesitation. "Then they've lost the right to know you," she said simply. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, sipping chamomile tea while Jennifer and Kyle sat on either side of me. No one asked questions. No one tried to fix it. They were just there. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. The following days were disorienting. My phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from my parents ranging from accusations, "You embarrassed us in public," to attempts at control, "You need to apologize," to veiled guilt. "Do you even realize what you've done to this family?" Not once did they acknowledge what they had said. Not once did they say, "I'm sorry." I blocked them. Then I made some calls. I changed my number. I updated my email. I adjusted all my social media settings. I cut off every thread that connected them to my world. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was survival. Emotionally, though, I was shattered. Not because I regretted what I had done, but because I realized just how deeply I had been shaped by their approval. Their rejection, no matter how deserved, still hurt like a severed nerve. Dr. Landon, my therapist, squeezed me in for an emergency session. "What you did," she told me after I shared everything, "was one of the most courageous things a person can do." "I don't feel brave," I said, wiping away tears. "I feel broken." That's what healing looks like sometimes. You break away from what hurt you before you can grow. That line stuck with me. In the weeks that followed, I moved forward, piece by piece. I accepted the job at the Bowman Institute and started preparing for my move to Seattle. Jennifer and Kyle helped me plan everything, from cutting financial ties to arranging a cross-country drive. Every step felt like reclaiming a part of myself. I also wrote a letter I never intended to send. It was to my parents, not to reopen communication, but to release the weight. I told them the truth, how much they had hurt me, how long I had waited for love that never came, and why I couldn't let them continue to occupy space in my life. Then I burned it. The smoke curled into the air like closure. There were moments I questioned myself. Nights I stared at the ceiling, wondering, did I overreact? Should I have stayed silent one more time? But each time I came back to the same answer, no. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. And finally, I had chosen me. The hardest part wasn't walking away. It was realizing they might never come after me with sincerity. No apology, no reckoning. Just silence. And eventually, a rewrite of the story that made them look better to their peers. But I didn't need their version anymore. I had my truth. And in that truth, I found something I'd never had growing up. Peace. There's a fantasy we all cling to when we finally speak our truth, that after the confrontation, after the release, comes instant peace, healing, relief. But the reality is far more complicated. In the weeks following my break from my parents, I began to understand that integrity, living in alignment with your truth, isn't free. It comes at a price. And sometimes that price is loneliness. My phone, once buzzing with family group chats and obligatory updates, now sat still. My inbox was quiet. Holiday invitations disappeared. Extended family, once warm at Thanksgiving tables, suddenly grew cold. Word had spread, but not the full truth, just the version my parents told. That I was unstable, that I had caused a scene at dinner, that I'd cut them off for no reason. I became the villain in a story I never got to write. One day, my cousin Lindsay messaged me privately. "Hey, I heard what happened. I don't know what to say, but I'm here if you want to talk." She was one of the few who didn't just accept my parents' version. We had a long phone call, raw, vulnerable healing. But others weren't so kind. Some family friends unfriended me on social media. A few relatives sent vague, praying for you texts, which didn't feel like support so much as judgment dressed up as concern. The cost of my integrity wasn't just losing my parents. It was losing a whole ecosystem of people who valued conformity over truth. Financially, the burden was real too. Without even consulting me, my parents pulled back the modest trust fund set up for life transitions. I wasn't surprised, but it still stung. Especially when I realized I'd need to figure out the Seattle move completely on my own. And I did. I sold most of my furniture, downgraded my belongings to what fit in my car, and relied on friends, real friends, to help me fill in the gaps. I found myself second-guessing everything. Was it worth it? Should I have just smiled through dinner, let their words roll off me like water, endured one more round of judgment in exchange for family photos and financial support? But deep down, I knew the answer. Peace of mind is worth more than any trust fund. There were emotional costs too, more than I had anticipated. I struggled with guilt, not because I had done something wrong, but because I had finally stopped being the good daughter. That role had defined me for so long. Now I didn't know who I was without it. There were moments I longed for my mother's voice, even if it came wrapped in criticism. I missed the familiarity of my father's Sunday lectures, the illusion of structure they gave. Even dysfunctional love feels like love when it's all you've known. My therapist, Dr. Landon, reminded me that grief doesn't just come from death. It comes from letting go of who you hoped people could be. And I had to grieve the parents I would never have. But there were gains too, quiet ones. Waking up in a space that was fully mine. Wearing clothes I loved without wondering if they'd approve. Pursuing work that ignited me, not because it made me look successful, but because it felt meaningful. I was finally beginning to live for myself. Integrity cost me the illusion of family, but it gave me truth, and with that came something rarer than approval: freedom. There's a moment after everything collapses when the silence feels unbearable. No more shouting, no more judgment, no more trying to win approval that never comes. But in that silence, something unexpected happens. You begin to hear your own voice clearly for the first time. That was the beginning of my rebuilding. Seattle was misty the morning I arrived. Gray skies, slick sidewalks, the smell of rain-soaked earth. I remember standing outside my tiny Capitol Hill apartment, staring up at the peeling paint and creaky windows, and thinking, this is mine. It wasn't much. A studio with creaky floors and secondhand furniture. But it was the first space I had ever lived in that felt free. Free of expectations. Free of scrutiny. Free to be whatever I wanted it to be. I hung up thrifted art prints. I arranged books by color. I bought bright yellow kitchen towels just because they made me smile. These little choices were acts of rebellion, but also healing. I was designing a life on my terms, one small joy at a time. My first day at the Bowman Institute was intimidating and exhilarating. The hallways buzzed with brilliant minds and purpose. Dr. Whitman, my supervisor, greeted me with a firm handshake and said, "We don't babysit brilliance here. You'll learn by doing." So I did. I threw myself into research, long hours, endless papers, late nights reviewing data. It wasn't just about career advancement. It was about building something that mattered, something rooted in truth and compassion, two things I had been starved of for so long. My work focused on emotional development in adolescents who had experienced family dysfunction. Every interview I conducted, every data point I analyzed felt deeply personal. I wasn't just studying resilience, I was living it. Outside the lab, life took slower root. Sophia, my neighbor across the hall, introduced herself with a plate of cookies and an open heart. She was a graphic designer with a wild laugh and a gift for making strangers feel like friends. We began having weekly dinners. Sometimes tacos, sometimes just wine and stories. Then there was Marcus, a quiet, kind high school teacher I met through a local book club. He listened without interrupting, noticed details no one else did. He never asked about my past, but always left space for me to share when I was ready. These people didn't fill the hole my family left, but they helped me patch it. The first holidays alone were strange. No stiff dinners, no forced smiles. No criticism hidden under the guise of tradition. Sophia invited me to her family's Thanksgiving. Her dad told dad jokes. Her mom insisted on thirds. They didn't ask why I was there alone. They just made room. Marcus hosted a misfit Christmas, an apartment full of people whose families were far away, dysfunctional, or just unavailable. We ate potluck style, sang badly to Mariah Carey, and laughed until our cheeks hurt. For the first time, I understood what chosen family could feel like. Therapy helped too. Dr. Landon became my compass, gently helping me unlearn years of toxic conditioning. She once said, "You're not broken, Christian. You were trained to prioritize survival over self-expression. But you're safe now. You get to choose differently." Those words stayed with me. I started making braver choices, speaking up at work, setting clearer boundaries in relationships, trusting my gut instead of asking what others would approve of. I even submitted my own research proposal for a new study on intergenerational trauma. When it was approved, I cried in the bathroom, not because I doubted I could do it, but because for the first time, I knew I deserved it. Rebuilding wasn't quick. There were nights I still reached for my phone, aching for a mother's comfort I knew I'd never receive. There were moments I wondered if I'd made it all up, if I had been too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. But then I'd look around at the life I had created, at the friends who showed up, at the work that made me proud. And remember, this wasn't built on fantasy. It was real, and it was mine. There's a Japanese art called kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold, highlighting the cracks instead of hiding them. That's what rebuilding felt like. Not erasing what had been shattered, but filling it with something stronger. Something beautiful, something unbreakable. There was a moment, sometime after the storm, when you realize the thunder has stopped, not because it's gone quiet, but because you've stopped listening for it. That's when you know you've come home to yourself. 3 years after the night that broke me, the night that freed me, I found myself standing in front of a packed auditorium in Chicago, speaking at a national psychology conference. My topic, the long-term impact of invalidation in parent-child relationships. My voice was steady. My research was solid. But more than that, I was standing in front of a room full of strangers and claiming space with no need for approval, only purpose. In the front row sat Dr. Whitman, Marcus, and 2 colleagues from the Bowman Institute. And, tucked under my blazer, resting against my skin, was the Phoenix necklace, a gift from Jennifer and Kyle, my real family. After the presentation, as attendees came up to shake my hand and ask questions, I felt something strange. Not pride, not even relief. Peace. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone, not to my parents, not to my professors, not even to myself. I had already arrived. A few weeks later, I received another email from my parents. This one was different. There was no manipulation, no guilt, no veiled threats or expectations. Just a short message from my father. Your work was impressive. We read the published article. It's clear you've built something meaningful. We don't expect forgiveness, but we hope for peace someday. I sat with those words for a long time. Not because they changed anything, but because for once, they weren't asking for control. They weren't rewriting the past. They were simply acknowledging reality. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to respond. Peace doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it comes with acceptance. Over time, I began reconnecting, not with my parents, but with pieces of myself I had long buried. The child who loved reading in secret corners. The teenager who found wonder in how the mind works. The young woman who dreamt of helping others feel seen. I didn't need to become someone else to be worthy. I just needed to reclaim who I already was. I spent that summer hiking in the Cascades, journaling in coffee shops, falling asleep with novels resting on my chest. I hosted small dinners with friends who felt like family. I planted lavender on my apartment balcony and let it bloom wild. And one evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, I whispered something out loud for no one but myself. I am proud of me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't shouted from rooftops. It was quiet, honest, and utterly true. Coming home to yourself isn't a single event. It's 1,000 tiny choices to show up for who you are. To speak gently to the child within you. To believe your worth without needing evidence. It's wearing what feels good. Saying no without guilt. Saying yes without fear. It's laughing from your belly. Loving without conditions. Leaving when love becomes a weapon. Some days the grief still lingers. A soft ache, not for what was, but for what never could be. But I no longer try to rewrite the past. I let it be. Because every step away from it brought me here. To a life I built. To a self I love. To a home that lives inside me. And if you're reading this, still standing in the ashes, still searching for a way out, let me say this. You are not too much. You are not too late. You are not too broken to begin again. Sometimes, walking away isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of coming home to you. Self-worth isn't granted. It's claimed. You don't need permission to become who you are meant to be. Sometimes, breaking away from family isn't rebellion. It's survival. The people who love you conditionally don't define your value. If you've ever felt excluded, overlooked, or underestimated by people who should have embraced you, this story is for you. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment below telling me, have you ever had to choose between being accepted and being yourself? I'd love to hear your story.